Very good. So as has been said a couple of times, I'm Pastor Josh, if you don't already know me. I'm the pastor to youth and families here at the Hernando Church of the Nazarene. And, excuse me, of course we got to clear our throat at the very beginning. But I know some of you guys have really been looking forward to this Sunday. Am I right about that? Amen. Not just because it's Sunday, but not even just because it's Family Sunday, so we get to worship with all of our kids and all of our younger parts of the church. Because that's worth celebrating, right? Not only because it's Harvest Sunday and we get to go and watch Pastor Andy eat a pie with no hands after service. Anybody else looking forward to that? Yes, there we go. Okay. I know y'all are alive now. But because today we're going to be preaching on what is some people's very favorite commandment. Let me back up just a second because I know we've got some folks in the church who haven't been here for the last couple of weeks. Welcome, first of all. We're really glad that you guys are here and that you've joined us. We at Hernando Church of the Nazarene, we are all about celebrating, connecting, and contributing to what God is doing in our community. We are all about that. And one way that we're doing that celebrating part is with this series that we're in right now called Love God, Love People. How do I love God and love people? Jesus said these are the most important commands that we can follow, and they're all summed up in, all of the law is summed up in these two commands, love God and love others. So we're looking in this series about how to love God and love people at how do the 10 Commandments point us to that truth of how do we love God and love people. Now you're all caught up and everybody's here, and everybody's really happy today because today we talk about the 4th commandment, which is remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And there might be a number of reasons why some of y'all love this command. Some of y'all might be thinking, if you've worked really hard all week, you're like, man, I really need a day of rest, right? Amen? My working folks, those who are working in homes with their families, those who are working in the workplace, we like rest. We need rest. So we might love this commandment for that reason. We also might love this commandment because this is kind of an easy one, if we're honest. I can rest with my eyes closed. I don't know about y'all, but I can rest with my eyes closed. I'm pretty good at that. Do I have any people who love to make lists? And like your checklist, you mark things off. Surely there's more hands than that. My list makers, my people who love checking things off the box. If you were raised that keeping the Sabbath is all about show up on Sunday morning to worship, man, that is a list maker's dream. The very first day of the week, you get to cross 10% of the 10 Commandments off your to-do list, and you are done with them. You see, like things like don't murder, don't commit idolatry. I have to wait until Saturday before I confirm that those haven't happened. And some of those are harder than others. Like some weeks it's harder to get through than others. But man, the very first day of the week, I can just check off, I kept the Sabbath holy. This is a list maker's dream. Talk about productivity. And so don't get me wrong. Sabbath is a really good news for us. And we all should celebrate and love Sabbath for these reasons and for more. But something that I'm learning, as a matter of fact, is that if we take this command of Jesus and we make it overly simple, we might actually miss out on the blessing that God intended for it to be. And we might even be able to flip the whole script. We might be able to do 6 days of rest and 1 day of work and still wind up weary if we miss God's heart for what Sabbath is really about. And so that's why I've titled this message, Weary Souls Make Poor Disciples. And I want to invite you all, we're going to look at what God has to say about this morning. So could you guys, if you're able, join me in standing as we honor God's word by standing for the reading of it? And it's up on the screen, so if you didn't quite get your Bible thumbed open to Exodus 20 fast enough, boom, right up there, it's ready for us. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. God, would you add the blessing to the reading of your word? Would you help us not just to hear it, but to obey it? And God, would you be with me in this time? Would the words I speak not be my own words, but would they be your words for the weary souls that are here this morning? Amen. You guys can have a seat. I had a friend in college. As a matter of fact, he kind of lived very close to me. He wasn't my roommate per se, but he lived a couple of doors down. And this friend of mine, he thought he had figured out the hack to resting well. He thought he'd figured it out. And we kind of like that. Anybody like a good life hack? Or a little like, this will make your life a little easier. Here's how to hack your sleep schedule, hack your energy levels, get your day just a little bit better. We like these. Well, his life hack really wasn't so much of a life hack, if I'm being honest. Let me tell you about it. This is the life hack. He figured out, I just need to have my days of rest and my days of work be totally, totally separate. And here's what I'm going to do. Sunday and Monday, I'm not going to sleep at all. Zero sleep. I'm just going to get up on Sunday and work all the way until Monday night. Sounds awful. I see some of your guys' face of like, oh my goodness. So as he's going through on Monday, he's chain drinking energy drinks to help make it through so that he can take his whole day Tuesday and sleep for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 hours, eat, fall back asleep. Some of you guys get how ridiculous this is, don't you? And then he'd kind of repeat that so that he'd be able to attend all of his classes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but he would just sleep all day on Tuesday and Saturday, and that would be all the sleep he needed for the week. I think it almost killed him. It did not last the whole semester even. We might not go that far in our pursuit of life hacks and ways of dealing with weariness, but we all have our own ways, don't we? Did you know, I'm going to reveal, back in my days of being sick from school, what I used to watch. Did you know that for one payment of $19.95 plus shipping and handling, you can get yourself a blanket with armholes in it? This is great news, y'all. I don't know how that might necessarily help us with our weariness, but the lady on the infomercial informed me that with this Snuggie, I can have a blanket on me and eat Cheetos at the same time. That's pretty special. There's another wonderful thing that I do every single day for my weariness, and that's I wake up and I turn on the coffee maker. Anybody else coffee drinkers? Pastor's got to keep his hand down. He's a tea drinker. It's all right. We'll forgive him. What about all kinds of health supplements that promise to boost your energy levels? This new phone and calendar and organizer app that promises to maximize your productivity. Anybody remember when cold plunges were a trend and everybody was filming themselves jumping in an ice bath and then going about their day just with supposedly magically more energy? Exercise equipment, all this stuff is marketed at our desire to not be weary. For some of us who are more experienced in our years, retirement is even kind of a form of this. Work hard, save well, and then in the later years of your life, rest. So here's my question for us today, and this is what we're just going to be exploring as we dive into the passage. What if what we need to find the rest that we need isn't something we can buy, it's not something we can do, it's not something we can earn, but it's simply found in stopping? I want to share with you before we get into the passage this principle of margin, because that's what I kind of see part of this scripture being about, this principle of margin. You guys know if we were to go back to my office, there's wall-to-wall books practically, and each and every one of those books has a little something in common. It's got this little white space around the edge. It's called margin. 99.999% of the margins of my books never get used. Are you guys the same? Every once in a while, I'll scribble a little note in the margin of my book. If I think, oh man, I've really got something to say, I'm going to write that down here. Make sure I remember that next time I read this 50 years from now, probably. And occasionally, I've got some dogs at home, I've got a baby at home. Occasionally, the margins of the book get used for a little bit of chewing on by them. But 99.9% of the time, these margins don't get used. But what the margins do is important. The margins protect the message. And so when something is important, we put margin around it to protect it. Is your time worth protecting? Is your rest worth protecting? This is part of what this Sabbath principle is about, because here's the bottom line. We serve a God who He can do more with 1 day of rest in your life than you can do with 7 days of work. This is the same principle we find in the tithe, that God can do more with 10% of our income than we can do with 100% of our income. And so let's look at this passage. Let's see what God has to say for us. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Sometimes we think Sabbath is just a fancy word for Saturday or maybe Sunday, depending on if we grew up in some Jewish or some Christian circles. Sabbath actually means something. It's a word that means stop. How many of you rolled through a stop sign on the way here? Florida drivers never roll through stop signs. What am I talking about? You guys are great. Sabbath means stop. But it also has another meaning as well, that is to delight, to enjoy. And so Jesus is saying, or God's saying, remember the stop day, the day to delight, by keeping it holy. It's set apart. It's different than every other day. God says you work for 6 days, and some of us are saying, wait, my work week's 5 days, and I like that plenty fine. Don't give me a sixth. 6 days to do all your work, but the seventh day is the stop day. Stop. Everyone stops. From, in their context, the lowest of the low to the highest of the high. Everyone stops. Even the animals. Dogs stop burying their bones on Sundays, I guess. Everyone stops. And here's the reason that it's all grounded in. There's a purpose behind all of this. It says, in 6 days, God worked. He made all of creation. He worked for 6 days. And then the seventh day, He stopped. He rested. He delighted. Some people have told me, Pastor, I know this might be a good idea, but I work a really demanding job. I own my own company. I'm not sure I really have the time for this. God rested. You don't understand. I've got a big family. I've got all kinds of things going on. There's always something. There's always somebody who's got God rested. I want to know my favorite excuse. The devil never takes a day off. Last I checked, the devil loses, y'all. Whose pattern do we want to follow? God rested. But here's what happened. This instruction was given to God's people thousands of years ago, and what they did is what we often do. Instead of enjoying this gift, this blessing of the Sabbath day, we turned it into a burden. Our coffee habits, our wonky sleep schedules, our 3 easy payments of $13.99, they fit right alongside ancient Israel's patterns of trying to keep the Sabbath. You guys want to hear some funny examples? What they used to do? So, Kara, you've got chickens, right? Do you know on the Sabbath, you can feed your chickens, but you have to feed them vegetables. You can't feed them grain. You want to know why? You know why? Kara's a pastor's kid. She might already know why. You know why? Shaking her head, no. If you feed your chickens grain on the Sabbath, those chickens might scratch a little bit of dirt on top of one of those kernels of grain, and guess what you just did? You planted on the Sabbath. This was one of their rules. Back in Jesus' day, this was one of the rules. So you got to feed your chickens vegetables so that you don't plant on the Sabbath. You want to know another thing you can't do on the Sabbath? We're all very hygienic nowadays. We would never do this. But you couldn't spit on the ground on the Sabbath. You know why you couldn't spit on the ground on the Sabbath? Well, what would happen if you spat on the ground and then you just kind of walked by and you rolled that little clump of dirt with your foot, you just made mud. And mud is mortar for buildings you just built on the Sabbath. Do we get a sense of how ridiculous this is? How we turned a gift and a blessing into a burden? And these all sound really dumb and silly to us, don't they? I bet if we were to give our coffee habits, our sleep schedules, all of our methods and tips and tricks and hacks to them, they'd say, "What are you doing?" All these rules, these tips, these tricks, these hacks that we try to work our way to rest are the kind of legalism and ritualism that Paul was speaking against in Colossians 2. He talks about we're no longer bound to these holy days. He even names the Sabbath. But he's not saying we're no longer bound to this because it's not good. He's saying we're no longer bound by the ritualism. We are no longer bound by the legalism. We are no longer bound by this is the way of working our way to rest. Because the point was never to work our way to rest. The point was never that we would figure out a million different ways, every way under the sun, to work to rest. Because whenever we work and complete our work in order to rest, we don't have rest. We have weariness. And so Jesus needed to come onto the scene. In the midst of all those rules, in the midst of all that legalism, to share with us the heart of the blessing of the Sabbath. We're going to read that in a little bit, but right now it's enough to glaze over it. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary." Anybody weary? Jesus says, "Come to me, and I will give you rest. Rest for your souls." Rest that's more than just skin deep, deep rest. And if I were writing the Gospels, aren't you guys glad I'm not the Gospel writers? If I were writing the Gospels, I would think immediately following up this story of, "I will give you rest," we need to put Jesus in a hammock somewhere. We need to really show how Jesus rested. You want to know what immediately follows up this story of, "I will give you rest"? Stories of Jesus working. Jesus is making things difficult for me in my preaching here today. It goes immediately from "I will give you rest" to Jesus' disciples and him. They're walking through a grain field and they start plucking the heads of grain and they start to eat. And they're harvesting to eat. And people complain against them. "What's going on, Jesus? Your people are working on the Sabbath. You just said you were going to give people rest." And he says, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." The Son of Man, Jesus himself, "I am Lord of stopping." Remember that stop, delight. It's not just Saturday. And then Jesus goes on. He goes in and he starts teaching people in a synagogue. And he sees a man who's hurting. His hand's all messed up. And he asks him, "Is it okay to do good on the Sabbath?" And he heals him. Jesus immediately follows up his teaching on rest with doing work. So what gives, Jesus? This is confusing. Jesus is teaching us something. The Sabbath was never about finding the right rules. The Sabbath is about finding freedom. The Sabbath invites us to place our rest in God's presence, not our performance. That's worth saying it again. The Sabbath invites us to place our rest in God's presence, not our performance. Because when we try to work our way to rest, when we try to find that next thing, whenever we try to get ourselves to rest via work, the inevitable result is that we are putting our rest on us. We are placing our rest as it depends on our performance. And Jesus is inviting us to stop, not because the work is done, but because that is the kind of God we serve. A God who stops. A God who created us for stopping. And so I talked about margin just a little bit ago. I talked about all these practices. That margin, that practice in your life is never going to satisfy if there's not a solution to the weariness that goes deeper than just the skin. Rhythms of rest, they might help a weary body recover from a hard day of work, but it's not going to solve a restless heart. We are going to constantly be tempted to place our value, to place what we achieve on the pedestal. If I do this, then I am worthy. If I accomplish this, then I can rest. If I just get here, then I can breathe. Once this project's over at work, then I'll be able to take a day off. Once I get through this busy season, you know how it is, accounting year end or anything. Once I get past that, then I can rest. Jesus invites us to a rest that is more than just time made holy, but it's a person made holy in our life. That is Jesus. And if rest is a person, if rest is Jesus, then that relationship takes time still. Anybody ever try to love your spouse without giving them any time? Doesn't work too well. Love requires time. And this is why we get this principle of the day of rest, the day of stopping. Because our love for God needs time. Our love for one another needs time. Love God, love others. And so we're going to wrap this up with what I hope are 5 just kind of helpful ways to live this. I just railed against 5 easy payments of $19.99. Now I'm going to give you 5 ways to practice Sabbath. There's a little bit of irony there. But I think we need this. I think we need practical ways to live sabbatically. So the first one I want to exhort us to, start with the Lord's Day. You guys know that for God's people before Jesus, the Sabbath was Saturday, right? And it was from Friday at sundown all the way to Saturday sundown, nothing. All those special rules about chickens and mud and spit were in effect. Those 24 hours. The early church, the first followers of Jesus, they did something a little weird. Even though many of them were ethnically Jewish, they started celebrating the Lord's Day. They began this pattern of meeting on Sundays, not Saturdays. There's a million reasons we could go into that, but the most important of those is that this practice of the Lord's Day comes from Jesus' own life. That Jesus worked. And in fact, he did work beyond what we could do on the cross. That he gave his life for us. And then Jesus' body rested in the tomb on the Sabbath day. And it rose to life on the new day, the first day of the week, the Sunday. And so that's why we gather here. That's why we celebrate here. That's why we cheer every once in a while whenever I get us going. Because Jesus is risen. Today is the day. A new life and a new week has dawned. And so for us, if you consider yourself a Jesus follower, this day isn't about that old legalism. This day is about love. If we love God, we're going to set aside holy time to be with God. If we love one another, we're going to set aside holy time to be with one another. And I know some of us are just new here. We've been attending 1 Sunday, 2 Sundays. I want to encourage you. I find that whenever I attend a church for the first time, my first Sunday is spent, how does everything work here? What's going on? So I want to encourage you to commit to more than just one Sunday here, to come back a second week and a third week if you can, because you're going to start to find yourself not just, wait, how do I fit in, what happens here, but you're going to find yourself in a place where people love God and love one another. This is my little preacher soapbox moment. 3 Sundays, it makes all the difference when you're visiting churches. Any of y'all who are moving, going north or anything, same advice goes to you. But I also received another piece of advice as far as keeping this Lord's Day in my own early ministry. And it was this: make Sundays the sweetest. It can be easy, especially for pastors, to make Sundays just another day of drudging through and working. Make Sundays the sweetest. For Megan and I, that looks like on Sunday morning, we wake up and we don't just drink coffee, we drink special coffee on Sundays. And then we come here and we get to worship and celebrate God's goodness with some of our favorite people in the whole world. And sometimes we go out to eat, sometimes we get to go home and enjoy a hobby of ours like cooking or making music. It's not about legalism. It's not about following all the exact rules. It's about worship. It's about rest. It's about loving God and loving those that He has put in our lives. Number 2, Sabbathize. I invented that word. Got a trademark on it, coming soon. Sabbathize your week. Some of you guys know that I love this Old Testament scholar by the name of Walter Brueggemann, and he says, people who Sabbath well live all 7 days differently. A well-kept Sabbath is more than just catching our breath before we go into another busy week. It's a practice that changes our entire life. It's a seed of rest that grows into our life. It is a slowing of the pace of life. It is a freedom to be content and avoiding constant striving. And it's nurturing this deep connection with God that we were all created for. And so we live what we believe. We live our theology. It's not just enough to say, I believe God is my rest. I believe that He can give us rest, if our lives, 6 days out of 7 a week, look restless. If we worship a God of rest and delight, our lives should start to look like rest and delight. And because our souls find rest in God, our bodies can also find rest in those rhythms of margin and even life hacks. But we can't get the cart before the horse there. Sabbathizing our weeks is all about putting in place those margins, those rhythms that remind us daily of who we belong to. One way I've had to work on this in my own life has to do with this little thing right here. We all know that cell phones and technology and computers and video games, they can have a way to just eat our time alive. And the bottom line is, sometimes that's good use. Other times, it's draining our rest. And so, a practice I've put in place is, unless I see an emergency pop up on my screen, this thing stays away from me until I've first had my quiet time with God in the morning, until Megan and I have had our morning breakfast together. It can wait. And so for you, that might look like short pauses in your day, taking time to pray over a meal and thank God for that. Leaving margin in your calendar to protect your time and protect your rest. Going to bed early on a Saturday. That way we don't accidentally fall asleep on the pews on Sunday morning. Remember that when something is valuable, we give it margin. So is your rest worth protecting? Number 3 is my daughter, Paige. You saw her up here. This is her favorite one. She's just learned this magic word, no. And I hope she remembers it. I hope she remembers it when busyness starts to crowd out those margins of rest in her life years from now. She's got lots of play and just, childlike joy ahead of her right now. If you don't take a Sabbath is eventually going to take you. Busyness has this way of just eating our lives away. It's a way of breaking us down. And so the Sabbath, remembering the commandment we read, it was for everybody, from the lowest to the highest, everyone. It was a family ordeal. The family rested together. It was a community ordeal. The community took a time. Some of y'all remember when we used to have Sabbath laws on the books, right? This is meant to be something we do together. And sometimes that means saying no. Because like Israel, we're tempted to add just one more good thing to our calendar. And it is a good thing. One more good thing. Until that schedule is just bursting with busyness. And work is good. God gave us 6 days to work. God worked 6 days. He worked 5 days more than he rested. But it needs to be in its proper place. Overwork isn't holy. God has invited us to live as if that rest, that eternal rest, has already come. And to be sure, we're going to have jobs in heaven. Don't hear me not saying that. But there remains a Sabbath rest for God's people, is what the author of Hebrews tells us. So let's make effort to enter that rest. And sometimes that effort is saying, 2-letter word, no. Simplify. Simplify your life. Some of us live our lives at a pace that is just one gear away from just complete insanity. Always running from one thing to the next, always late, always striving, always running. And I'm naming myself a little bit here sometimes. God intended for there to be an intentionality around the things that we live our lives with. And so some of us need to hear this more than others too, but binging on social media is not rest. Binging The Price is Right is not rest either, to be clear. A long Netflix day is not rest. None of these things really contribute to the weariness of our souls. And many of them, especially social media with its tendency to push us towards desire for purchasing things, desire for other people's lives, it actually increases the restlessness of our lives. Sabbath means stop. Stop means stop. Just saying, stop signs, right? Stop. Unless there's nobody watching, right? There you go. Again, going to reference another author I love. His name's T.S. Eliot. He's an English poet. And a long time ago, about 100 years ago, he writes this really poignant phrase describing us as, make sure I get right, distracted from distraction by distraction. He didn't even know what this thing was. But he's describing us many times. That rather than deeply resting, we distract ourselves from our lives. We pull away from the things that are most important. And especially if you're a type A personality, if you're a high achiever, taking a day to just rest can feel wasteful. It can feel like, what am I doing? I could get so much more done if I just... It might feel as wasteful as an afternoon TV binge even, but Sabbath rest is refreshment, not distraction. The word that Jesus used for rest. I'll teach you guys a little bit of Greek today as we're closing out. It's anapazo. You guys want to say that? Anapazo. Guess what English word we get from anapazo? Pause. Yes, somebody said it. Anapazo, rest, is more than just a pause, though. It's more than a button on our TV remote. for whenever we need to go to the bathroom and then come back to our show later. Rest, the way Jesus talked about it, is renewal. So simplify. Whether it's daily life or that special day of rest. Simplify means learning to stop and delight, not just distract. So we shape our lives around the things that matter, our family, our worship, our prayer, a good walk, a nap even. You guys know that naps can be spiritual practices? We serve a Savior who invites us to be still and know that I am God. That's why we're just going to wrap up here with 5, seek Jesus. I said that were like 5 practices to kind of like hone our schedules, fix our rhythms. This one's a little different though. And it's because our deepest weariness is not with our schedules. Our deepest weariness is with our souls, is with our need for God. Just want to take a second to invite you guys. When Moses gave this command to the Israelites in Exodus 20, he puts the purpose of the command and the reason for the command in God's creation, right? It says, God created in 6 days, so rest on the 7th. 40 years later, Moses gives this same exact teaching as the people are ready to go into the promised land. It's in Deuteronomy 5 if you want to read it yourself. And when he gives this command, he changes the reason for it. Silly Moses, he wasn't a very good preacher. Messing with God's words. But he changes the reason for it. He says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Remember when you were slaves in Egypt. Let me ask you guys, how many days a week does a slave work? 7. They remembered when they had no rest. When you're a slave to something, you don't have rest from it. In our own lives, if we are a slave to our work, if we are slaves to sin, if we are on our way towards death, we have no rest. But God so loved us that he sent his Son to be our rest. So this is why Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary, I will give you rest. Because again, rest is not a practice. It is a person. Sabbath is a resistance to that lie that pushes in on all of us to put our worth on what we do, on what we have, and on what others say about us. It's saying, yes, Jesus, on the cross, in your life, in your resurrection, you finished the work. So seek him first, because no amount of margin, no amount of life hacks, no nap, no routine is ever going to give you rest if it's your heart that's restless, if it's your soul that's weary. No organization app is going to fix it. And I don't know if we've all received that salvation. I want to read to us Jesus' own words and invite us into prayer this time as we close our service. We stand. These are Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. Are you tired, worn out, even burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you will live freely and lightly.